Today is June 13th, 2026, and today is National Sewing Machine Day, which is a celebration of a machine whose entire purpose is taking separate pieces and stitching them together into something useful. And after looking through today's stories, that felt strangely appropriate, because today's episode ended up being about rules. The rules that govern police interrogations. The rules a teenager ignores for an entire movie. And the rules people created thousands of years ago simply for the fun of playing a game. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and someone who apparently spends an unhealthy amount of time wandering through historical rabbit holes so you don't have to. On June 13, 1966, the United States Supreme Court issued its decision on Miranda versus Arizona. Even if you've never taken a law class, you've almost certainly heard part of the result. You have the right to remain silent. It's one of the most recognizable legal phrases in the world. It appears in movies, television shows, crime novels, cartoons, comedies. At this point, many people know the warning by heart. Far fewer know the story behind it. The case centered on a man named Ernesto Miranda. In 1963, Miranda was arrested in Arizona and questioned by the police. After hours of interrogation, he signed a confession. The problem was that he had not been clearly informed of his rights before being questioned. His attorneys argued that this violated protection against self-incrimination guaranteed by the Constitution. Eventually, the case reached the Supreme Court. The justices faced a larger question. How can a suspect exercise constitutional rights if they don't know those rights exist? The court's answer was straightforward. Police should clearly inform people of certain rights before custodial interrogation begins. The decision established what became known as the Miranda warning. What's fascinating is how quickly those words entered popular culture. Many Supreme Court decisions remain known primarily to lawyers. This one became part of everyday language. And here's an interesting twist. The ruling did not free Ernesto Miranda forever. After the decision, prosecutors retried him using evidence that did not depend on the original confession. He was convicted again. The case wasn't really about guilt or innocence. It was about procedure and establishing rules. And nearly 60 years later, millions of people still hear some version of that warning every week on television. That's a remarkable legacy for a legal decision. And speaking of rules, sometimes the most memorable stories come from watching someone ignore nearly all of them. On June 13, 1986, Ferris Bueller's Day Off opened in theaters. At first glance, the plot was wonderfully simple. A high school student decides he'd rather spend a beautiful day exploring Chicago than attend class. That's it. That's the movie. And yet it became one of the most beloved comedies of the 1980s. Part of the appeal was Ferris himself. He wasn't a superhero. He wasn't especially athletic. He wasn't trying to save the world. He simply possessed an almost supernatural confidence that everything would somehow work out. Throughout the film, Ferris skips school, borrows a Ferrari, crashes a parade, visits museums, and repeatedly outsmarts adults. And one of those would normally be enough trouble for a single afternoon. Ferris manages all of them before dinner. One detail I always enjoy is how much the movie functions as a love letter to Chicago. The Art Institute, Wrigley Field, downtown streets, neighborhood landmarks. The city isn't just a backdrop, it's practically another character. Then there's the parade scene. Matthew Broderick standing atop a float singing Twist and Shout. Hundreds of dancers filling the streets, people joining in from office windows and sidewalks. It's one of those movie moments that feels joyful even when viewed decades later. What helped the film endure wasn't the plot, it was the feeling. Most people have experienced a day when responsibilities could wait and curiosity felt more important. Ferris simply turned that feeling into an entire movie. And nearly 40 years later, audiences still quote it. Not bad for a story about skipping school. And after a story about a teenager playing hooky, it seems appropriate to talk about actual games, especially games people were playing thousands of years ago. On June 13, 2018, archaeologists announced the discovery of ancient gaming pieces dating back thousands of years. Now, when people imagine archaeology, they often picture treasure: gold, jewels, weapons, monuments. But some of the most revealing discoveries are much smaller, because they tell us about ordinary people. The gaming pieces were discovered among artifacts that helped researchers understand daily life in an ancient community. And the discovery raises a surprisingly simple question. What did people do for fun? History books often focus on rulers, wars, and major events. But most human beings throughout history weren't kings. They weren't generals. They weren't famous. They were just people trying to get through the day. And apparently, many of them enjoyed games. The pieces showed evidence of structured play, strategy, and social interaction. In other words, people thousands of years ago were gathering with friends and competing over rules, just like today. One thing I found myself wondering while reading about the discovery was what conversations surrounded those games. Did people argue over the rules? Did somebody insist they weren't losing because of bad strategy, but because the game was unfair? Did someone always take too long deciding what move to make? If you've ever played a board game, you probably already know the answers, because human nature hasn't changed nearly as much as technology has. That's one reason discoveries like this are so fascinating. They collapse time. For a moment, people who lived thousands of years ago stop feeling distant. They start feeling familiar. And after spending today's episode around laws, school rules, and game rules, it feels appropriate to end with an actor who built a career playing characters who often had a complicated relationship with authority. Born on June 13, 1943 in Leeds, England, Malcolm McDowell became one of the most recognizable and distinctive actors of his generation. His breakthrough came with Clockwork Orange, a performance that immediately captured public attention. The role was challenging, controversial, and impossible to ignore. And in many ways, it established a pattern that would follow him throughout his career. McDowell excelled at portraying complicated people: rebels, outsiders, rule breakers, characters who made audiences uncomfortable while still holding their attention. Over the decades, he appeared in films, television series, voice acting roles, and stage productions. What stands out is his longevity. Many actors become associated with a single role. McDowell continually found new audiences through new projects. One thing I appreciate about his career is that he never seemed interested in playing it safe. Whether audiences loved a character or hated a character, they usually remembered the performance. And in entertainment, being memorable is a valuable skill. Looking back across today's stories, I noticed something interesting. Rules aren't really the point. People are. The Miranda decision focused on protecting rights. Ferris Bueller built a movie around bending rules. Ancient games transformed rules into entertainment. The structure matters. But what people do inside that structure is where the story happens. Anyway, that's what I ended up finding while working through June 13th. And before I go, here's today's oddly appropriate quote. The problem with the rat race is that even if you win, you're still a rat. Lily Tomlin. If you'd like to hear more of my work or see other corners of the internet I've been quietly building things in, you can head over to waitthat'srandom.com. I'm CL Burns. Thanks for hanging out with me for a few minutes. I'll see you tomorrow.